Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Candice, and I'm here today with Adam Davidson. Hello, Adam. Welcome to this channel.
Hey, Candice. I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you so much for joining me on this first ever podcast episode on my channel. As you can see, maybe I am a bit nervous because it's my first one, and I know that Adam is a professional at this, so it's good in a way because he will guide me through this first episode. And so yeah, I just want to introduce you to Adam, or let Adam introduce himself to you. Let him talk a bit about why he's here on this podcast. Obviously, there's a link with ADHD, as you might have guessed. So Adam, do you mind telling us a bit about yourself in the way that you want, and then we can start?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to. And as you know, Candice, I told you, I think you're too nervous. You're doing fabulous. My whole career is as a journalist. I worked in the U.S. at NPR, which is like the National Public Radio Network. I created a podcast called Planet Money, which still exists, although I left a while ago, that deals with economics, money, for a general audience. The goal is to try and make it fun for a broad audience. I also did a lot of international coverage. I covered the war in Iraq, covered the earthquake in Haiti back in 2010. I covered the tsunami in Indonesia back in 2004. A lot of kind of crises and so, but the first half of my career was radio. Then I went to the New York Times magazine where I wrote about economics. And then I went to the New Yorker magazine where I wrote about economics. But all that time, a deadline journalist. And I learned pretty late in life, in my late 40s, that I had ADHD. And I grew up in the 70s when it really wasn't a common diagnosis. I don't remember anyone talking about it. I didn't really know what it was. But once I learned that I had it, it made a lot of sense. I understood both a lot of my strengths. Like, I think ADHD, you suddenly get a phone call, you got to get on an airplane, you got to go somewhere in the world where there's a crisis, you got to work 20 hours a day and get the story. And then just when you're starting to get bored about the story, you're done and you go somewhere else. It's kind of perfect job for someone with ADHD. But I also realized there were things I wanted to do that took longer, that required more planning, more patience, and I really, really, really struggle with. So it's been pretty life-changing to learn late in life and kind of rethink my whole life going back to my school days.
Right. Thank you so much for this introduction. You actually skipped right to the end of the interview where I was going to ask if you think people should get diagnosed even late in life. And you said it's life-changing. So that's one of the messages of this podcast, I think. And the first question I wanted to ask you about this late diagnosis is what led you actually to get diagnosed at that age? So you said you were 48?
I think I was 48. I might have been 47, 49. It was right around then.
Right.
It was actually funny. My brother was taking his son to be diagnosed because his son's teachers had said, we think your son might have ADHD. And so my brother took his son to a psychologist, and the psychologist said, well, your son definitely has it, but have you been diagnosed? And my brother did some diagnostics, and they said, oh, you also have ADHD. And so my brother was telling me this, and I was like, what is ADHD? I've heard about it, but I don't really know what it is. And I think at the time I thought it was like a fake thing. I thought it was like, a lot of people my age look at people in their 20s as like, oh, they have to have a million identities. They get these fake diagnoses. And I think there's a lot of dismissal of ADHD as like a fake diagnosis that you just don't want to study, like you're lazy or whatever.
You just want to take Adderall.
You want to take Adderall, exactly. Like you can take it, you can sell it,
A
or
lot
it's
of
an
stigma.
identity, a lot of stigma. And I had
Hmm.
that stigma. It wasn't something I thought about. It was just when my brother brought it up, I was like, oh, isn't that nonsense? It's like,
Mm.
you might as well tell me you're infected with aliens or something. And, but he started telling me about it, and I was like, oh, wait, that kind of sounds like me. And around the same time, just by coincidence, my regular doctor, just my general doctor, said, have you ever been checked for ADHD? And he handed me this sheet, and it was like a checklist, and I was like, it was like 1 to 4, and I was like 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4.
Are you often late? Yes,
Yes,
very
yes, yeah,
often.
yeah. Are you? I mean, I could. This camera is very carefully positioned, so it looks. But my room is a total mess. My office is a disaster.
Yeah,
Um,
my desk is not showing, so it's great.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I have a lot of junk I'm looking at. And so I went to a psychologist, and he actually said, like, you seem to be successful in your business, like your work, your career in journalism. So do you even need treatment if you're already getting what you
Mm,
want? And I said, well, I do want to do other things, writing books, creating longer term projects. And I can't do, really struggle. Like, I did write a book, but it took me
mm,
7 years to do something that probably could have taken 6 months if I had focus. But then my other big issue was my son. Like, my son, and since then my son has also been diagnosed.
right.
That we love each other very much. We have a very good relationship, but if we're not both interested in the same thing, we do find it hard to connect. And I try and
Hmm.
get interested in what he's interested in. I'm not very successful at getting him to be interested in what I'm interested in. But I think ADHD can really, if you're not thoughtful about it, it can really affect being a parent in a negative way. So those were my two
Hmm.
big issues. And I think if I had not been diagnosed, I think I would be really struggling. I mean, I am struggling. ADHD is a lifelong struggle, obviously, right? We
Hmm.
never get over it. But I at least know what the struggle is. I know there's,
Right.
people like you who I can talk to about it. I can learn your techniques. We can talk, like that. It
There's hope.
There's
There's
hope. There's
treatment.
hope. There's treatment. And also there's forgiveness. Like I
Yeah.
think I felt a lot of shame and guilt that I wasn't accomplishing things I wanted to accomplish. I didn't
Mm,
understand why I was so bad at it. And the people around me didn't understand. Like, they were disappointed, they were mad. So it's been really
mm,
wonderful for my marriage. My wife is, you know, it's still a struggle. It's hard to be married,
mm.
obviously, to someone with ADHD. But she's much more, she recognizes that it's not just me being lazy or I don't care about her. Like, I truly struggle to do certain things.
Now you have the tools to explain that to her, and I guess
Yeah.
it makes all the difference in the world.
So much. Yeah. And she has the tools. Like, she's like, okay, I know. I
Yeah.
got to really spell out the details. I can't just say,
Hmm.
can you do the dishes? It's like, can you wash? Can you
Yeah.
put the dishes in the
You need
dishwasher?
to
Can you
give me the
take the,
step by
yeah,
step instructions.
exactly.
That's actually a discussion I had with my boyfriend recently. I was trying to explain to him that a simple task for you might be like a million things in my head, and I just won't do it. If you tell me to take the trash out,
It's too
I,
much. Yeah.
it's too much. It seems weird to, I guess, neurotypicals, because like, why is just taking, like, doing something that seems to be so simple so hard for us, but it truly is a struggle.
It
So
truly is. And even worse, like, oh, can you do the dishes? And then you start with the dishes, and then, oh, by the way, can you also take out the garbage? And it's like,
oh
wait.
no, no, that's
Yeah.
not possible.
Yeah,
I
that's
can't
not.
do
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
already started something that's like already an achievement. So
Yeah.
yeah. Before I'm forgetting, because I know I'm going to forget, there was something really interesting that you said about, so your doctor said, how did you manage to be so successful with ADHD? And that's a misconception that a lot of people have, that people with ADHD cannot be successful, whether at school or at their jobs. And my first encounter with a psychologist actually was with someone who told me that I couldn't possibly have ADHD because I went to university and I had good enough grades to go to university. And obviously that was someone who wasn't really informed. That there's a lot of psychologists actually who are not really informed and who can say those things to you, and then you kind of miss a diagnosis because of this. And it's interesting. I'm coming back to this because you mentioned your life as a journalist, and you mentioned going to places with a lot of adrenaline, deadlines, this kind of environment that actually probably helped you. How did you fall into journalism? Like, did you, was it a conscious choice? Did you always notice there was something with you that, like, you always needed that kind of adrenaline? Or did you, like, how was that choice made, and how did it help you regulate your ADHD in a way and perform at that level?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And looking back now with the diagnosis, with you actually know a lot more about ADHD than I do, and I'm excited to learn more from you. But I actually started when I was in when I was around 9. There's a program in New York City where I grew up called Children's Express. This would have been 1979, where they took a bunch of kids and we would interview like politicians or business people or whatever, and kind of create these stories that would then be distributed to newspapers all over the United States. And sometimes we would do TV broadcasts. Like when I was 11, I did like reporting on the street for, in America, it's called the Today Show. It's one of the big morning shows. And
Mm-hmm.
I actually interviewed teenage prostitutes in Los Angeles with a crew
At
of,
11.
at 11. Yeah, I don't think
Wow.
they would do that now, but in 1981, I guess it was okay. Um,
Right.
and so I knew from that age, like, this is for me. I love this.
Right.
And actually, my mom was just visiting me, and she was talking about me as a young boy and how I struggled so much to study, and I put things off, and I got so frustrated when I had to study. And she talked to the principal of my school and said, "I'm really worried that Adam isn't going to succeed in life." And the principal said, "But he's so curious. He gets so excited about new things. I think that's going to be really helpful." And I think
Mm-hmm.
if I explained it to myself that I loved journalism because I was curious. I loved learning things. But really I loved learning new things. I loved learning
Mm-hmm.
I loved, with journalism, you sort of, you get an assignment from an editor or whatever, and you have, like, depending on the outlet, you have 3 hours or 3 days or 3 weeks, whatever it is, to just go all in on this topic. And you have to, like, learn enough that you can write something smart and acceptable.
You're
um,
always in a rush
and you're
then.
always
Yeah.
in a rush. You're always, everything
Yeah.
is new, which obviously the ADHD brain loves new stuff.
Yeah.
Just and then, like, the second you might get bored, the second it's like, okay, I get it, you're done. And then it's the next thing. And so now I can look back and it's like, I picked this career that allowed me to just constantly leap and
Mm-hmm.
almost never have to be in that bored place. Although I
Mm-hmm.
did have this phenomenon, which now I can understand, but I didn't then, that I would, sometimes in journalism, it is like you get an assignment at 9 in the morning and it has to be on the radio or in the newspaper. Like, you have to be done by 2 p.m. So you have like 5 hours or something. But sometimes it might be 2 months, or it might be a big project. And I found after I finished those big projects, I would just be
Exhausted.
completely exhausted, living in a fog, like
Mm.
very little emotion, very depleted. And I found that very confusing, because when I was, like, I remember covering the tsunami. I mean, you would have been very young, but it killed hundreds of thousands of people. And I was sent to northern Indonesia, to Banda Aceh, right where it had happened. And it was one of the most horrible experiences of my life in many ways. Just, I saw more dead bodies. I interviewed many people who had lost. I mean, I remember a woman who, she went shopping and her entire village was gone. Her husband, her children, her parents, everyone she had ever known, just gone. It was so emotional, and
Mhm.
you do feel those feelings, but also, and I don't know if this is terrible to say, it was so can I say it was so thrilling to be a journalist there? Like you felt, this is important. I'm bringing these stories to the world. People need to know this. But also it's like the importance is, it's dialed all the way to the most. This is really important. And my job is like, I got to take this woman's words. I got to make a story out of them. I got to get it on the radio within a few hours. And I mean, I went for, I think 2 weeks. I don't know if I slept 4 hours a night, and I just didn't care. I was just going. And then I remember I then went to a hotel in Jakarta and just completely collapsed for like a week. I couldn't move. I could barely pick up the phone to call room service. And that was sort of a lot of my
Ups
career.
and downs.
So when you say like, how did I choose it? If you had asked me at the time, I'd say, well, I'm just really curious about the world. I want to know more about the world. There was a time when I was at college, at university, and I thought, oh, maybe I'll be an academic. I'll be a professor. But as I began looking into getting a PhD and realizing that you have to study one topic for
This
years,
is so scary.
I thought, I'd get so bored out of my mind. But I also think you're exactly right. I mean, that it's brain chemistry is a great way to, like, there's a noble way to say it. I want to bring the truth to the people. I want to learn how the world works, which is all true. But I also,
something that worked for you.
It worked for me. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think curiousness is like a second aspect to it. It's like it worked, like the rhythm, the environment, the thrill, the dopamine worked really well, and it was probably like an unconscious action to go to that. But the curiousness is definitely something that we see in a lot of ADHD people. I mean, virtually everyone, I think, who has ADHD is extremely curious, extremely driven, and passionate. And that's also something
Absolutely. Very passionate. Yeah.
and that takes me to the book you wrote. I thought so. I think so. Adam wrote a book called The Passion Economy. It came out in 2021, if I'm correct.
2020.
2020.
Yeah.
And is it this book that you mentioned took you 7 years to complete?
Yeah. And
So that means, sorry, it was before you started writing it, before your diagnosis.
well before my diagnosis. In fact,
Right.
yeah, that's actually, I forgot about that. That's a good thing you brought up. It was a terrible, like, I sold the book in 2013 and it was supposed to be done in 2014. I basically did nothing until 2015. I mean, I would sit and look at the computer and I'd stress but I did nothing. And then in 2015, I wrote a whole book, but I did it in a very lazy way. I did it very rushed and I turned it in and the editor was like, this is useless. This is not, there's nothing here we can even save. It was one of the worst experiences of my life. And I just felt lost. I spent another 2 years just, I mean, I felt such shame. I felt, the way a book works is you sell it, and I actually sold it for a lot of money, like a lot of money. And so you get a portion of the money up front, and then you get the rest when you, yeah.
You need to deliver.
And it was getting to the point where they're like, we might need to get that money back. And I had already spent all the money. My wife was very concerned because we needed money. And all I had to do was finish this friggin' book. And I didn't know how to start. I didn't know. I was just lost. And so I was diagnosed. And then I did some CBT, some cognitive behavioral therapy work, specifically for ADHD, where, I learned about, kind of what is my working chunks, like 45-minute chunks, taking a minimal break, then doing another 45-minute chunk. It also took me a really long time to just ask my wife for help, because it happens that my wife is a wonderful writer and an editor. And I was able to write, I think, a pretty good draft of the book, but putting the finishing just touches, like really just making it grammatically accurate, getting rid of repetition, previously, like as a working journalist, most of the stuff I did was fairly short. It might be 800
Mm-hmm.
words. It might be 1,200 words. Probably the longest thing I wrote was 8,000 words, but a book is 100,000 words. It's a huge project, and it's
It's
just
overwhelming.
overwhelming. And
Yeah.
so it was, but I think I felt such deep shame, and I felt that, like, the kind of fear, like maybe my wife won't love me I mean, it's not true. Of course, that's not going to
Mm.
happen. But like,
Yeah, the financial stress, the
yes,
stress from your wife expecting something from you, the stress from the people who gave you the money. I mean,
it was
I can
awful.
only
And
imagine.
also feeling like maybe I'm a fraud. Maybe I'm not a good
Mm.
writer. Maybe I'm just a good writer when it's short and quick and nobody's paying that much attention. But when I really start writing, it's terrible. But the truth is, asking for help makes sense. Having a good
Mm.
editor help you is a good thing. Everyone who's writing should have an editor. And
Definitely.
so that the whole full experience was really just gave me a lot of understanding of how to live a life with ADHD and the strengths
Mm.
and the weaknesses. Because I'm finding it's very common. A lot of my friends in their 50s, a lot of your 20s, 30s, 40s is like proving, can I be successful? Can I be successful? At least it was for me. And so it's very external. It's very like it's curiosity driven, but it's also, let me make my editor happy. Let me get to the next job. Let me get to the next success, win awards. But now it's more like, what do I actually care about? What do I actually want
Mm.
to leave to the world? And I find those projects take longer. They're still
Mm.
really hard for me, but at least I understand why they're hard. I'm more
Mm.
forgiving. My wife's more forgiving. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting to. I had no idea, and makes so much sense the struggle you had to write the book. Um, Now that I think about it, obviously it would have been a struggle, and I think probably everyone who has ADHD and tries to start something that takes so long to craft, and where the reward is very far down the line, can be so difficult to start. Even with my videos, I can say I face the same, something that I call being stuck, where I made a few videos about this actually, because it's the thing that I experience the most, where I know what I want to do, I know kind of what I want to say, I know how to do each step, but it all feels so overwhelming that I'm just there staring at the wall blankly and just not doing anything, and it's paralyzing. And as you said, it affects your self-esteem, it affects the way you see yourself, and you feel a lot of shame with it. And that's actually something I wanted to talk about, but I wanted to come back to the fact that you wrote a book about passion.
Yeah.
And it's funny because, as I said, people with ADHD are very passionate people, and your career kind of shows this as well. You went all in every subject you tackle as a journalist. So, what made you want to write about this economy that you call the passion economy? So maybe you can remind us or tell us a bit about the book so we can understand what's in it exactly.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, your questions are great, and they're making me realize some things that I had never thought about before. Which, like, because the idea of the book came long before really I even knew about ADHD, let alone that I had
Mhm.
ADHD. But you're making me realize, like, oh, that was all. That was because I had ADHD. So I was a business and economics journalist. I never
Mm.
cared about business and economics. I grew up, actually, probably a lot of the grown-ups I grew up with had ADHD because I grew up in a building. Greenwich Village in Manhattan and New York City it used to be really the center of art. Now it's kind of fancy and expensive. But I grew up in a building that you had to be an artist to live there. It was subsidized, so it was low. It's the kind of thing that exists in Europe more than in the US. It's a building of all artists. My dad's an actor, and my mom she's been an actor, a dancer, and run arts organizations. And so all the adults I knew were artists. Nobody cared about business or economics, and I didn't care. But then I had this like increasing desire just to understand how the world works, and spending time in Iraq and the Middle East. I was like, wow, why are some people poor? Why are some people rich? How does that all work? And that led me to discover that business and economics is kind of like the secret rule book of how our world works. So I eventually became a business and economics journalist. And I actually took enormous pride in taking topics that seem so boring, like stock market or bonds and interest rates, currency exchange rates, and trying to make them really enjoyable and exciting to regular people, which seems like a very
Mhm.
ADHD thing to do.
Yeah.
Um, but there was a thing that I kept noticing that didn't make total sense to me, which is that it's a sort of obvious point, but most of the goals in business and economics and finance at the end of the day are to make more money. And I didn't really care that much about making more money. Like I like having nice stuff. I like my life. I prefer my life when I have more money than when I have less money. But money as a goal was like, I mean, that's like one of the standard things they say about people with ADHD. You just can't, that can't drive you. That can't. Um, and so I was interested in that fact. I was also interested in that the economy seemed to be changing. That
Mhm.
if you look at the economy of the 20th century, for the most part, it was a much, it was like an economy built around really large companies with fairly stable, standardized products and systems. So if you went to like a company that made blenders or an oil company or an accounting company or whatever in say 1945 or 47, it's probably operating pretty similarly. The story's a little different in Europe because of the two world wars, and so but let's say 1952 to
Mhm.
1982, like things are pretty stable. There's not a lot of change, and for the most part, for most people, the way to succeed was to just fit a role, to just do a job. And, you're going to be a junior accountant, and then you're going to be an associate accountant, and then you're going to be a senior accountant. And maybe if you're lucky, you'll manage the accounting department. And maybe there's a small number of people, the CEO, a small number of people who get to actually make creative decisions,
Mhm.
actually represent themselves. Or you have these outsiders, artists and musicians, weirdos who get to be creative, but they have no money. And
Mhm.
I'm oversimplifying, and this doesn't apply to everybody, but as a general rule, the 20th century, in a way we can call it the anti-ADHD century. Like, success came from being pretty routine, pretty standard. And I was noticing that this economy seemed to reward originality. Things are changing so rapidly. Whatever product you can think of, whatever business model, whatever industry you can think of, it's probably totally different than it was 10 years ago. It might be totally different than it was 10 months ago. And that creates a space. Now, I didn't have this language when I started this research, but honestly, it creates a space for ADHD. It creates a
It
space.
does.
Yeah, the rewards to novelty, to freshness, and to passion. Like, if
Mm.
you think of the clothes you wear, the cosmetics you buy, the sheets on your bed, whatever, your car, and you look in the 50s and the 70s and the 80s, it was a fairly narrow range of options.
Mhm.
And probably if you went to all your friends' house, they'd have the same that you have. And now you have so many different choices, so many different options, and that it and you can apply this in so many dimensions that it allows for far more of our lives to be filled not with like, I mean, there used to be like one kind of toilet paper for the most part, maybe three kinds of toothpaste. I'm just using those as examples. You can use whatever example you want. And it's fine. Nobody was thinking, "Oh, this is terrible. We need 100 kinds of toilet paper." But and you go to your friend's house, they probably have the same toilet paper. It's not on your mind. It's just, but now you can like maybe this is a dumb example, but you can like, oh, I really like my wife and I have different toothpaste because we have a different, like there's different flavors we like, there's different sensations we like. There's like, and you can apply this to so many aspects. Food is wildly more, you know, you're from France where food has always had a more passionate, but in America, you know, the the way food works, the way beverages, the way all of life works, and so that's really the argument of the book, that I probably in the 1950s would have been a passionate person with no money. But now you get to be a passionate person. And if it's important to you or you want to, you can also find how to connect with people who share your passion. So you can find the people, you can really make a business out of really serving the needs of a small group of people and serving them at a very high level, as opposed to kind of the average, the blah, the mediocre, you know, and reaching 1 billion people, but nobody's that excited.
Yeah, it's completely true what you said about people with ADHD not necessarily wanting money. What we want is to do something very passionately and to often, I mean, I speak for myself and I think for you, to help people in a way, but the strong desire to do something that's helping and to learn something new every day, like you said, be creative. So I think your book like probably targets a very, very strong ADHD audience. And I think it's amazing. And you're just basically teaching people how to make a living out of their passion, which I think is great. And I was actually noticing on YouTube, I was noticing a lot of creators who I had the vibe from them that they had ADHD. And I told myself this must be like just one person and, you know, out of a dozen. And then I started noticing it more and more. And it kind of joins what you just said, that actually this economy opens up a path for ADHD people. And I think a lot of us is out there taking this path to, I guess, in a way, you know, financial freedom, but it's not the purpose of it. It's just to share what you have to say with the world. And I think that's a very strong value we have as ADHD people. Again, I'm speaking from personal experience, but I think I can sense it in a lot of people who have ADHD, whom I know. It's this feeling that the need we have to share everything we know and to be of help to other people. So I think it's great that you wrote this book. I need to have it on my bedside table and
well, I think
to grow my audience.
I mean, you're exactly like, you know, I started reporting as a kid, but I started my professional career like in 1992. And so let's say in 1992, I knew what ADHD was. I cared about ADHD and I wanted to share it with the world. The number of gatekeepers I'd have to go through if I want to publish a book, you know, there weren't so many books being published. They probably would have said, well, what's your academic background? Do you have a PhD? And I'd be like, no, but I think a lot of people will relate to me because I'm young. And they'd be like, yeah, we're not interested, you know?
Yeah.
Or like I worked in radio in the 90s and, you know, there was no podcasting, there was no YouTube. It was, if I wanted to get on the radio, there's only so many stations and I had to find one of them and convince them to let me use their airwaves, which means everything is moving in this kind of standardized way. It's going through,
slower.
It's slower. There's a gulf between the end user, like the person listening or watching, and the person creating. And if for some reason we decided, you know what, this is so important, I want to create my own talk show about ADHD, like I'd need millions and millions of dollars. I don't even know how. And it's not that I would have to convince the end user. Even if we know for sure there's 1 million people out there who want this, I have to convince the people who control the airwaves. And I can say from experience, they're not very good at it. Like if you look at what was chosen in the 90s, when it was all chosen by small groups of people, it's totally different from what is actually enjoyed now that it's much more democratic, that people choose what
Mhm.
they want to consume. So, like, you and I are talking, we're using the app called Riverside. We met through the app called Focusmate, which I love for ADHD. It's
Yeah.
an amazing.
We need to tell them about this.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
true. That's a hive of people with ADHD Focusmate. It's amazing how many people I meet on this.
It's one of the
So
best tools. I think it might be my single favorite
it's
ADHD tool, even though it's so
me too.
simple.
It's
Yeah.
amazing. It's amazing. We need to actually promote this tool, even though we're not sponsored or anything. But Focusmate is a tool where you basically connect with an accountability partner, and you work with them for 25, 50 to 75 minutes. And you can use it to get anything done, basically. Some people clean, some people like record music, others write papers, like literally anything. I think you were writing a podcast actually
Yeah.
when we met on there. And I talked about ADHD, and then you mentioned that you had just been diagnosed, and that's kind of how we started talking. So amazing tool.
Yeah,
Great
it's
tool to
so
network.
great. And it's really easy. It's just you go on, you got something to do. It
Yeah.
gives you a partner. It could be in India, it could be in California, it could be in Luxembourg. And then
Yeah.
you just hold each other, you quick talk. Hey, what are you working on? What am I working on? And then, because it's a bunch of ADHD people. So if you don't watch it, you could just
Yeah.
chat the whole time. And then,
Yeah.
but you and I agreed we'll chat later. We'll schedule a separate time,
Exactly.
And
No,
I've
it's
had that with a
crazy.
bunch of people. I was working on a research project
Really?
about, the book I'm working on now is about ancient Mesopotamia. And I had this real question I was struggling with. And just by coincidence, the Focusmate person, I was like, what are you? And she said, oh, I'm a professor of ancient history working on XYZ. And I was like, wait, that's
Wow.
literally what I need to know
What I'm
about.
working on.
Yeah, it was
Oh, that's
crazy.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although when you think about it, I've talked to dozens of people. Maybe, eventually you'll find people who,
Exactly. I think if you're willing to talk, it can be massively helpful. Like just to chat a little bit about what the other
yeah,
person is doing. I often find like gems
yeah,
hidden
exactly.
in Focusmate. So, and I was gonna say you mentioned that now about the passion economy. It's so much easier to get started, and that's true because I had nothing when I first started my YouTube channel. I don't have much now. I bought some gear, but it's the start. I just had a camera, so that was already a good start. Um, so we don't need very much now to get started. But about Focusmate, it's crazy how now with the tools we have, um, there's so much more opportunities because I would have never ever met you um, right now at this moment in my life had it not been for Focusmate, which kind of breaks down the barriers of status, basically. And that's what amazed me is that we connected on ADHD, and then we decided to chat. But otherwise, I'm very early in my career. I'm just starting my YouTube channel. You could have very well been on different paths and never meet. So I think it's exciting actually to be in this economy now
Yeah, it
where we
really.
have so many opportunities.
Although I
It's
think
crazy.
one of my strengths as a journalist, especially a business journalist, is I'm pretty indifferent, and I do associate this with ADHD. I'm pretty indifferent to status. Like, actually,
Mm,
today I'm actually planning. I'm going to have a little bit of a fight with um, a billionaire, and I just and it's actually I'm working on a project, and there's a bunch of people involved, and people are nervous, and I'm like, I don't care.
mhm.
What's he going to do to me? I don't care. And I would, you know, a young person who's like doing something I believe in a way that I find exciting, 10 times out of 10, that's going to be fun and
Yeah.
exciting. Like, the last thing I want is like a boring dinner with someone
Hmm.
who's like fancy and rich, who's boring. Like, who needs that? Um,
Mm.
and, but I think that, so this is a very simple way to think about the change. But if it's just, if you think of like before, say, the late 1900s, most of life was very local. You lived in a village, or even if you lived in a city, you didn't have a car. Your life was sort of as far as you could walk, or maybe as far as like your donkey could take you. And so if you had a weird passion, maybe you could find people, maybe you could become a monk or a priest, maybe you could go to sea, but most people never left a few miles from where they were born. And it's not that no one lived passionate lives, obviously lots of people did, but it was very prescribed. Then you have the industrial revolution, and you have this like bigness, you have this, these giant corporations, these giant supply chains, where you can have a passion, but it's that buffer that's really hard to connect, so you can make the same thing and reach millions and millions of people, but it's really hard to make that special thing. That's why there's these little like artist enclaves, and there's special,
Mm.
but for the most part, for most people. But now it's so trivial to sort of find your village of passionate partners all over the world, and you can have different ones. Like, I love ancient history. I have people all over the world I talk to about ancient history. I'm very interested in ADHD. I have a few people
Mm.
around the world I can talk to about ADHD. I really love cheese, so I have people I can talk to about like
You can
really
talk to me about cheese as
cheese.
well.
Yeah, I think in that case, any French village, I'd be fine. Like
Exactly.
yeah, I just call any random number in France and I can have a
Yeah.
conversation. But in America, it's unusual.
Yeah.
Um, so and that, like, it's both, like, the main thing it is wonderful. It just makes life richer.
Hmm.
But then it's also economically, like, it's actually rational. That's what I love about it. That in the
Hmm.
50s or 70s, I mean, in the book starts with the story of my dad, who was this passionate, he's never been diagnosed, but I'm pretty sure he has ADHD. And his dad was of followed the rules and did a boring job for 50 years, made money, and that's that. And my dad lived a passionate life and always struggled with money. And now you don't have to choose, which I think is
Hmm.
cool. It's not that money matters so much, but one thing that there is an ADHD tax. There's a big ADHD tax, which is that I've lost so much money just not filing my taxes, not sending expenses to my
Hmm.
bosses, not being smart about money, kind of forgetting. And so, there are like, there's sometimes I can almost talk about ADHD like it's only a gift, it's only wonderful. And I do like to remember
Mm.
it really is a challenge. I think
It
about
is
that.
a pain. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It is. And I actually wanted to come back to the diagnosis because I think, I don't know, I have no idea how much time just went by. So,
Yeah, we're at
yeah,
44 minutes.
right. So
Yeah.
I was thinking if we must wrap it up in a bit, I wanted to come back to the diagnosis because I'm so curious to know about the effect it had on you. And I just want to know, so how did you feel after? So I guess you got diagnosed in a few sessions like I did. So usually for ADHD diagnosis, you see your psychotherapist, your psychiatrist once to explain that you want to get diagnosed. And then there's a few sessions where there's a lot of questionnaires and um, after like 3 or 4 sessions for me, you get diagnosed. So I'm curious about once you heard from your brother and then your doctor about ADHD, I suppose you went and you went ahead and got a diagnosis. How did you feel that moment when you left the office with the official ADHD diagnosis at 47? How did that feel?
So my memory is that the first feeling was real, like almost euphoria, like real happiness, like it lifted the guilt and the shame. Oh, now I understand why I struggle with these things. Now I understand. But then I remember feeling a new shame that it's like admitting I have a disability, admitting I'm ill, and it actually made me, it created a new host of anxieties. Like, if I handed in something late or if things were messy, are people now going to think, oh, basically he's broken. He can't be
Mm.
trusted. He's, it felt embarrassing, like walking around naked or something. It felt like showing too much. And so that I really, I mean, that was a few years where I really didn't want people to know. Um, I didn't, I didn't want to talk about it. Um, and clearly there was embarrassment. So it was like internally I
Mm.
was glad. Internally I was like, okay, now I understand. Now I can build tools. Now I can get things done. But I don't want anyone to know that's happening. Then I
Was there a
actually
part of, oh, sorry,
no
go
no go
ahead.
ahead go ahead go ahead.
I was going to say, was there a part of you that wanted to uh, get better and almost cure yourself so that people wouldn't even notice you had ADHD and just because you had the tools, then kind of think, wait, I'm going to employ all the tools I have at my disposition and I'm going to become a neurotypical person.
Yes, I
Because
do think yeah, yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
No, sorry, I cut you off. But I remember when I went into cognitive behavioral therapy, and it took me a while to realize I was living in a fantasy that
Mm,
I'm going to do this for 6 weeks and then I'll write 2 books a year and I'll never have a messy desk again and all my finances will be perfect. And realizing like,
mm,
oh, this is going to be a struggle for the rest of my life, but I have more tools now. Like this,
yeah.
I can
I,
both. Yeah.
I think this is the most brutal transition from the fantasy that comes right after the diagnosis, where you think, oh, now that I know, I'm okay. Like I can make that go away. And then when you start to realize that it's not going away and that you will have to deal with the disappointments, disappointing other people, which hurts even more than disappointing yourself, and you will have to deal with that over and over again. And I think what you actually need to learn instead of the quick fixes is how to accept yourself in the end and how to accept those deceptions. And I think I saw it in one of my friends who just got diagnosed, and he kept telling me how he bought all this those notebooks. He has like now 4 or 5. He
Oh my
writes
god.
everything down. He's
Yeah, I got
super.
so many. These are all
Oh,
notebooks.
sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So he has so many of them now, and he's so happy. And I'm like, I'm trying to prepare him for that time when he realizes. So I'm like, like that's great. I'm so happy for you, but please be aware that this is not gonna, like, you're in a high right now. you're gonna you're gonna crush at some point, and
Yeah,
it's
and
gonna
it can
hurt.
be really like I've had moments of like, oh, do I not get to do anything I want to do now? Like, do I just have to,
Mm,
because I made this choice to leave deadline journalism and do longer term projects. And there have been periods where I've thought, oh, maybe I don't get to do that. Maybe I'm stuck. And I think what I realize now is it's well, I'm very much in the struggle. Like my sense, I'm
mm.
assuming it never ends. Like
Yeah,
it's forever.
I agree.
But it's I'm I'm a little more aware of choosing the struggle. So like the things that are not going to be easy, some of them I just will never be able to do.
Mm.
Some of them I can do, but it's going to take a lot. It's going to take a lot of focus and it's going to take help. I'm going to need outside help. Um, and maybe I think I had a fantasy I'll write a book a year. That's not going to happen. It might be a book every 5 years or
I get
something.
you.
But yeah,
Yeah. I
but
have a fancy of releasing a video every week, so I
yeah.
understand that.
And then, and the perfectionism that we experience
Mm.
and, I mean, I still struggle with a lot of it, but I feel more at peace. I think I did reach a point where I was like, I kind of gave myself permission not to succeed in everything I want,
Mm.
I will say becoming a parent is a very helpful thing in that you're like being a good dad is so much more important than any other thing, even though I'm not always a good dad. But also just being older and realizing um
What's
like
important to you?
what's important. And yeah, and turning, like, I think you kind of go up and the world feels infinite, and then somewhere around 50, I mean, certainly for me, and I think a lot of my friends, you start realizing you only have so much time. You do have to make choices, and you can't live in this world. But I still live in fantasy. I mean, I'm about the next call I have, I'm going to hire a new assistant. Every assistant I hire, there's like a little fantasy. Oh, they're going to solve everything. I'm done with, and I learn the same lesson every time, which is if I don't tell them what I need, if I don't spend the time building a system,
Mm.
they can't read my mind. That's unfair to them. And it's just a fantasy. Like it is a fantasy that, so yeah, I mean, the fantasies are tough.
And I had a question to follow up with that about, so you said when you get to your 50s, that you kind of go back down from the high. Do you wish you had been diagnosed earlier? So let's say in your 20s, like I was, or like, how do you think about this? Because you were quite like you are. Sorry, you are successful. You're a successful journalist. You do a lot of things that have worked throughout the years, and you seem pretty happy. And despite the ADHD struggles, everything has worked out pretty well. So, is there a part of you that wished things like you knew that from the beginning, and you could have made things different, maybe improved your relationships, or I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never thought of that. That's a very good question. I think, I mean, part of me says no, because I really like my life now. I love my wife. I love my son. I love where we live. And this is a profound thing. I feel like it would have shifted the access of my life. I really, when I think about my late 20s, from about 24 to really to like 33 was a pretty rough time for me, where I kind of came out of college. I got a really great job. I felt like I was king of the world. And then a few things went the wrong way. And I really struggled. I think I really felt like kind of a loser at 27. And so part of me wants to say, if I do now look back and associate it with ADHD, that I was really,
Mm-hmm.
I was starting my journalism career. I didn't yet know how to, I started in daily radio, where it's like 2 hours a day. I'm responsible for everything that's on the radio. Everything is urgent. Everything is live. I loved it. It was amazing. And then I started wanting to do longer radio documentaries, longer magazine stories, and I hadn't figured out how to do it. And I just
Mm-hmm.
struggled and struggled and struggled and struggled. And it was a time of self-loathing. It was a time of deep, like, so looking back at that poor kid, if I could take that away, like, of course I would. Um, but as you get older, you wonder, like, well, then so many good things happened after. So
You wouldn't want to take those things
I
away.
wouldn't want to take those things away. So, but if the answer is it better to be diagnosed early than late? I think definitely early.
I think
Um,
there's no good answer, but what you said about self-loathing is quite powerful, because I feel like the effect of not getting an early diagnosis is almost always something to do with very poor self-esteem, a lot of struggles, and self-loathing, which is a strong word, but which is actually true. And even me, before my diagnosis, which was at 20 or 21, even the few years that were uh, so from my probably like around 14 to my university years until I got diagnosed, those were like, I have a lot of bad memories because of my ADHD struggles, which I didn't know were ADHD. And you know um, handing my coursework late, uh, having all the students look at me weird because they didn't understand why I was submitting everything late, and I seemed like I didn't care. Um, it was a lot of pressure and a lot of shame, as you said, also a lot of self-loathing, which kind of actually led me um, to a depression. I think that I never really got diagnosed for, but right before I learned about ADHD, it felt I got to that point, which is to say that it can lead you to reconsider your whole self and question your sanity and wonder like what the hell is wrong with me. And
Yeah.
if that feeling persists your whole life, then of course there is a point to getting diagnosed early. And there's a part of me that wished I got diagnosed when I was a young kid, honestly, because I know I wouldn't have gone through all the weird stages that I went through at university. So
I mean, I'll
that's
say with my
interesting.
son, I got him diagnosed as soon as possible. Like,
Mm.
and
How old is he now? If that's
he's
not enough.
11 now. He was
Okay.
diagnosed, I want to say 8 or 9. And
Right.
even though it was kind of obvious to me when he was 6, but his teachers weren't convinced yet. And
Hmm.
my wife was worried about stigma. She was worried about the teachers treating him differently.
That
But
is a real issue, yeah.
yeah, but I maybe oversold the benefits because he was so excited when he was diagnosed. Like I think he thought he got a
That's cute though.
superpower. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it really helps him, and his school is very
Mm,
understanding, and his friends
that's
are
great.
understanding. Like, yeah, I mean, I had, they say anxiety and depression are kind of two sides of the same coin. I had enormous anxiety, panic attacks, real,
Mm,
um, I really struggled, and it's hard to even remember that because I mean the last 20 or so years have been pretty great overall, although
mm,
obviously like everyone I have ups and downs, um but I really feel for that guy, the person I was in those years.
mm,
School,
definitely.
weirdly, school was not, I struggled with doing the schoolwork, but I think I was enough. I had the brain of a journalist, meaning I could very quickly synthesize information, write a good paper, kind of figure out how
Right.
to pass a test. So I did well in school,
Did you wait
um,
until the last minute though?
but
All
always to the very last minute. Yes, every
right.
time. Yeah, yeah,
That's how I recognize
yeah,
someone who has ADHD. Someone who
yeah,
says like I start coursework the minute I am giving coursework. I'm like, no, you can't have
yeah.
ADHD. It's not possible.
I um I remember one time in college, one time I was like, I'm going to start this paper early, and I did.
Mm,
And the teacher was like, "This is an amazing paper," and I felt so proud. And I was like, "From now on, I'm always starting them early." And then I
yeah.
never once again. No.
From now on, I am
Yeah,
doing my homework early.
yeah,
Never works.
yeah. I
Uh,
did want to just say something. So,
yeah.
just quickly, because I know we're going for so long, but two things. So, one is like this is why ADHD is such a potent thing. There are real pain. Like I have a couple cousins who have ADHD and really struggle. They're my age, around my age. They really struggle with drug abuse. They've been in and out of prison. Their lives are very hard. And it's not entirely, obviously, it's not entirely ADHD, but they had a much rougher childhood than I did. Um, but they associate ADHD with their inability to overcome some of the barriers. And I always do want to remind myself, like I grew up in a loving family, an educated family. We weren't rich, but we had resources. I was able to go to good universities. Um, that there is real pain, and I never want to forget
Mm,
that. At the same time, my job is a lot of my job is to interview very successful people, and it sure seems to me that a disproportionate number of successful people seem to have the telltale signs of ADHD. And I will sometimes ask them, "Do you have ADHD?" Or I'll say, "I have ADHD," and very often they'll say, "Oh, well, I have ADHD." And
mm,
I mean, I have a friend who's an Academy Award winning writer and director. I have, um, in fact, I know several top writers and directors of Hollywood movies. I feel like all of them probably have ADHD. I know very successful business people, and and so it's important to remember the pain, but it's not to say it just is a superpower. You have to be in the struggle. You have to
Mm-hmm.
come up with tools. I would guess every one of those wildly successful people had really dark periods because ADHD gives and takes. But
Mm-hmm.
this idea that you mentioned earlier that some people have, that you're limited, you're never going to be successful, it's feels like almost the opposite of the truth,
Yeah.
that especially now.
It's good to remind that those people sometimes who seem on the exterior very, very successful sometimes have unbalanced life if they don't treat that ADHD. So for
Yeah.
someone who's not diagnosed, they can be like a very successful actor or director, like you said, and then have a very poor family life because they're not able to balance properly the energy they put. So they'll be, workaholics. Like I know very
Yeah.
well because my dad is one of them, and he probably has ADHD. So I
Yeah,
know
and
what
I
that
do that.
does.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I have to like break myself, like go play with your kid. Don't.
yeah.
And it's hard. I'm sure he
It's
feels I
hard.
don't do it enough. Yeah.
It's the kind of hyper focus we talk about in ADHD. It's like once you find something you're so passionate about, you want to do it every single hour of the day, and it's hard to stop yourself from doing that. So it's another aspect of why it's so important to get diagnosis, because you need those tools if you want to live um, a balanced life, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I wanted to close this interview by asking you a question about self-acceptance. So I was going to ask, do you think you've reached self-acceptance about ADHD? And I realized I don't really think about self-acceptance that way. For me, it's definitely, this can sound cliche, but it's a journey. And as we mentioned a couple of times during this interview, we're never done learning about ADHD and being disappointed by ourselves because of ADHD struggles. So, is there like a certain aspect of your life where you see that you've made progress in accepting yourself and accepting your ADHD, and maybe some others where you're struggling a bit? And, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that, so I do think just a general emotional, like, I give myself much more of a break, which,
Mm.
and so I don't feel the shame. I mean, I almost want to say I just don't feel it. I'm sure I have it in there somewhere, but
Mm.
it's, that was a really strong feeling right up till diagnosis and after. So that's way better. Like, I think I like myself, and part of that is loving my son and seeing some of these things that I hated in myself in him and loving them in him. It's like it
Mm.
helps with like learning to love myself. Um, I am. I also basically see my life, like a major component of my life is an ongoing struggle with ADHD. And so the way I'm structuring my work life, like I'm really, this conversation, I'm leaning into things like this. I'm saying no to, like, I was doing a work project for a major corporation that I think they wanted me to do some things that could have meant huge financial upside, but it was boring. And I just said no. And it wasn't just boring, it was like, I hated it. And
Mm.
but what that means is my life is constantly like, when someone says, "What do you do?" I'm like, I do a lot of, I'm producing a movie. I'm working on another movie. I'm actually sort of have two books that I'm writing. I have a consulting business. I do coaching. I do, like, it's a little bit, I host podcasts, like I'm doing a lot of different things. And
Mhm.
some people find that kind of weird and confusing, but I'm like, I love it. I love it. I love my life that way. It's too much, no question. It's too much. But I'm at my worst when I have too little,
Mhm.
and I know I'm never going to find the perfect balance. It's just
We
not
need
possible.
stimulation.
We
It's
need
just,
stimulation,
yeah.
exactly.
So,
Um, but there's a lot. I still care a little a lot about what people think, and that can be good. I mean, you don't want to be a
Mm.
like a sociopathic narcissist, but I also, I'd say the place where I feel the most unhappy about my own behavior, I really think I'm a great dad. I think I get along great with my son. We have a lot of fun. I wish it was easier for him and me to just like we both have ADHD, and we have these like brief moments of a lot of connecting, a lot of interest, and then we kind of go look at computers, or I do work, and then we come back, and then and I
Right.
like I look at friends of mine who can just like spend the whole day just in unstructured engagement with their kids, and I don't know how to do
Mm.
that. I wish I did.
Yeah, that's something I can relate to with my dad, as I said, because uh, I learned very late, like after my diagnosis, that he might have it. Now he wants to get diagnosed, so I don't know how that happened, but great. And he never was 100%. I'm not going to say there for me, because I feel like he was there, just not very physically there sometimes, as in he had hobbies, like he would, play tennis a lot, uh, work a lot, and we would connect very strongly on few moments, and then he would go do his thing. And he had a few of his things that he did very often, and that was why I couldn't see him in those moments. But maybe it's because I have ADHD myself, but I don't feel like it really had a negative impact on me. And now I'm really grateful, now that I understand like how he functions and how I function. I'm able to accept this dynamic of us both being into our things and then joining together and talking about our interests. And this is the most fun conversation I can have with someone. It's just like, oh, you did this. This is so fun. Like, we're telling each other about our passions, and he's always really excited about things for me. And yeah, it's just a very good relationship to have. And I'm sure in a way that it's something similar. I guess I'm not in your relationship, but something with your son where
Yeah.
you guys are both kind of explosive with your ADHD, and sometimes join together and talk a lot and are very passionate, and then you do your thing on your side. And can be quite intense of a relationship. I think that's what I noticed with my own, but in the end, it's good.
Yeah, I love hearing that. I mean, that really
Yeah.
genuinely makes me feel very, very, very good. And I hope Ash says that about me
Yeah.
in 10 or 15 years. That would mean the world to me. I mean, we really do like connect when we connect, and
Mm.
it's like the best thing in the world. It's so fun, and yeah. And I just want him to know like I love him so so much. I think he knows that. I think it's pretty obvious.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
sure he does. Well,
Yeah.
that's such a good and cute way to end this podcast.
All right, great.
uh,
You could
it
interview
was,
him next. You got the late
yeah,
diagnosis,
let's
then we
go.
could do the
The
early
whole family.
diagnosis. Yeah, exactly. And then my wife could really tell you what it's like
Oh,
being in a house filled with these crazy
that would be
people.
interesting.
Yeah.
Wow, interviewing the husbands and the wives of people
Yeah.
with ADHD. Whew.
Yeah.
Can't wait to hear what they have to say about us.
Yeah.
Well, it was so amazing talking to you, Adam. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to interview you. I had a blast. I hope my questions were okay for my first
No,
time
I
first
thought
podcast.
you're so good at this. I mean, as you know, I've told you, I've watched your videos, and
That's
you're
very
really
nice.
like you have such a authentic, genuine curiosity and hunger to both learn yourself, but then share it in a clear and usable way. It's fabulous.
Thanks.
Yeah.
That's too many compliments. I'm gonna blush. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
All right.
Well,
Thank you.
it was amazing to have you. If people want to find you and everything you're doing, the books, so many more things you can find out about Adam, where can they go and find you?
Yeah, it is. I should have one place, but I have ADHD, and it's
you do
hard
you
for
do
me
have
to.
a website, right?
Yeah, I do have adamdavidson.com, which
Uh,
I should probably update, but I have a lot of the work I've done
yeah.
there. And then
Mhm.
so that's probably the easiest place. Yeah.
And then I'm sure they'll find you a bit of
Yeah, I'm
everywhere on the
kind of
web.
everywhere. Yeah.
I link everything I can in the description box. So
Fabulous.
uh, thank you, Adam. Thank you to everyone who watched us. See you in the
Wonderful.
next
Yeah.
one.